Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of A Conversation in Isolation with Sonia Rossi. A series of interviews with people around the world to talk about how isolation has changed our lifestyle and how are we coping with isolation. I'm very excited to say that today I'm joined by a special guest in Canada, Victoria, Canada, called Pippa Turney. Pippa is a good friend of mine, and I'd like to welcome everyone on Instagram. And as I invite Pippa, I'd like to also mention that this conversation is recorded on Instagram Live, and it will also be available as a podcast on Spotify and as a video on YouTube. Okay, so I'm just going to invite Pippa to join us now. Welcome, everyone. Hello, Pippa.
Hi, Sonia. I love your scarf.
Oh, thank you. I love your scarf too. It's very similar.
Thank
Let me
you.
have a look.
This one's all folded up. I talked about it in that scarf blog that I wrote on my up on Facebook that finished about a month or so ago.
All right. So no more scarf blogs.
No, I ran through my collection of 30 spring summer scarves, so you'll have to wait till the winter now for the rest.
Oh, okay. So welcome, Pippa, and hello to everyone listening on Instagram Live. I'm very excited to have you on this next episode. So tell me, Pippa, how are you?
Well, I'm fine, thank you. It was probably better yesterday when the sun was shining because it's raining again in Victoria and it's quite cool outside, but that's Victoria weather.
Right. So it's Sunday morning in Sydney, Australia, and in Victoria, Canada, it's actually Saturday afternoon.
Well, late afternoon. It's just after 5 o'clock. That's right. Nearly tea time.
Lovely. It's actually a little bit rainy in Sydney too today. It's been rainy most of the week actually.
But you're heading towards winter, that's allowable. We're heading into summer. This is very, very strange weather for Victoria. So it's warmer in other parts of the country.
Right. Well, welcome, Pippa. I'd like to start our conversation today and welcoming everyone who's joining us on Instagram. Tell me, so Pippa Turney, tell me a little bit about you. Who are you, Pippa Turney?
I'm Pippa. Well, I'm Canadian, as you've gathered. I also happen to have Italian citizenship, and it's because of Italy that I know you, Sonia, and your family, because I lived in Italy for a long time, raised both my children there, and also taught English as a foreign language. So I came back to Canada in 2006 and settled in Victoria and left English teaching because I needed to make some money. But after I stopped working, I decided to apply for a international volunteering placement with Cuusoo International, and that's when I decided to use my skills and experiences from English language teaching. And that's why I went to Laos last September to teach English as a foreign language in Vientiane.
So exciting, Laos. I've heard a lot about it from some of my students that are from there, but I've never actually been. Tell us a little bit about how you decided to, obviously you wanted to use your skills as a teacher, and how did you come about this Cuusoo program?
Well, I always knew it had existed. I mean, ever since I was quite young, in fact. I remember my mother talked to me about applying to Cuusoo after I finished university, but you don't listen to your parents. You do what you want to do when you're younger. And but it was always something that had stayed in the back of my mind that at some point in my life I could possibly give back in some way to society, to people who didn't have the same kind of opportunities that I had growing up. And that was why I
Yeah.
applied to Cuusoo as an international volunteer.
Lovely, lovely. So you went there in September 2019, and you were teaching and enjoying enjoying this experience. Tell us a little bit about what were some of the fantastic things that you learned while you were there, teaching these students in Laos.
Well, I learned about a culture. I had the opportunity to sort of really immerse myself in culture, because when you're just traveling through a country, you're often sort of isolated in the sense that you're on your own. The only kind of interaction that you have with people is, say, in shops or in restaurants. Um,
Yeah.
in this case, I was living in a Lao neighborhood, in a Lao house, surrounded by Lao people, teaching Lao people 5 days a week. And in a very short time, my students became my friends, and
Right.
so it wasn't just about being there and going, being a teacher. It was also getting to know a bit of the language, getting to know a lot about things like the music, the art, the religion, which is very important in Lao culture because it's a primarily Buddhist country, and many sort of events revolve around going to the temple. Yeah, it was just so much more than just traveling through.
Lovely, lovely. And while you were there, obviously, we're now in isolation all over the world, and COVID happened a couple of months ago, started. So you were in Laos when this started, when COVID started to become an international problem, because as we know, it started in China, and I think a lot of us didn't really realize how serious it was at the beginning. At least I didn't realize that it would spread all around the world. How did you react when you first heard about COVID-19, being in Laos and teaching and living there?
Well, I probably should have paid more attention and thought more seriously about it, because after all, Laos has got several borders with China, but nobody seemed particularly concerned. It was something that was happening in another part of the world. And I think because I'm North American, and probably it's the same for you being Australian, you sort of look at your points of reference are primarily the Western press, So when I wake up in the morning, I read The Guardian, and then I read the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation website, and that's how I get my news. Everything was kind of downplayed, or it was just something that was happening somewhere else. And so I wasn't particularly worried. I mean, it was something that was in the news. I remember I gave this activity to a group of students towards the end of January, where I was teaching them adjectives of nationality. And I gave them 5 or 6 headlines. And and they had to identify the news as to whether it was, I don't know, Spanish or Thai or Burmese or something like that. And in one case, the headline said something about the Wuhan virus, and that is exactly what it was called in the press. So please, nobody accuse me of being racist or anything like that, because at the outset, that is what the virus was called. Anyway, the students all recognized it, and I remember sort of somebody commenting on, well, it isn't here in Laos, and this Wuhan virus, after they identified it as Chinese, and it's in China, so we're okay. And that's basically how everybody thought about it. So that was it.
Yes. So life went on, and you were reading about it, but it didn't really affect you personally at that point.
That's it. And I hadn't heard of any cases in Laos.
Right, that's right. And so this started to become more serious. And when was the moment that you realized that things were changing and you might have to leave actually before your scheduled time? Because I know that you were supposed to stay in Laos for until June, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, until it was until the end
July.
of June, until the end of the course that the current course that I was teaching on, and well, I guess it was really the last week I was there that things began to ramp up. The other volunteers were recalled by their organizations, and that's what's important. I was no longer attached to Cuusoo at that point because Cuusoo had pulled its operation out of Southeast Asia on the 15th of March, and everything sort of blew up around the 16th of March. So it was the Thursday of that week that the teaching facility where I was working decided that they would suspend all their classes, and it was a ministerial decree, in fact, that made them take this decision. And at that point, I had to leave because even though I had a place to stay and I could have stayed on, well, the reality is I would still be there at this point. And
I see.
there are no flights out of Vientiane. There are no flights out of Laos. The borders are closed, and the borders were closing at that point. So I had to go. I had to go.
I see.
Simple as that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Big shock, big shock. So you decided to leave and you went back to Canada, and you arrived in Canada where isolation had already started, and I think you had to adapt to this lifestyle, this new isolation lifestyle. How did you go through accepting this? What was the process like for you? The big shock of leaving Laos, going back to Canada, and having to change your routine and also your plans because you would plan to stay there. What was that process like?
First of all, it wasn't the homecoming that I had imagined, because when I was supposed to be returning home in June, that would have been for me in Canada the height of dragon boat season, and I'm a dragon boater, and I was all set to spend the rest of the summer dragon boating. And while doing that, I would be getting ready to go away yet again. I had plans to leave Canada sort of late October, early November, return to Laos, where I found another school in the north of Laos that wanted experienced teachers to teach conversation. And it would have been a great place for me to live, to continue learning Lao language. I'd be able to pop down to Vientiane now and then and visit my friends in Vientiane. And then the next stage of those plans were that I would stay in Laos until about February. And remember, I'm retired. I can do these things now. I could do those things. And February would find me in India, where I was going to do some traveling. And then go and volunteer in another sort of women's cooperative in the lower Himalayas. All that, and I would be back in Canada at the end of March, or end of March, or middle of April, something like that. Anyway, I had all these plans, and so all of a sudden, everything I wanted to do was taken away from me. It just, everything changed. I came home, I had to self-isolate, I couldn't hug anybody, I hadn't seen my son or my Victoria friends for 6 months, and to this day we haven't hugged each other. So I miss Laos terribly, and at the same time, I'm glad I'm back in Canada for the advantages of being in one's own country, in one's own house. But at the same time, it's been difficult to adjust.
To adjust. I'd just like to say hello to Tin, who's a student from Laos, one of my ex-students who's just joined the conversation. Hi, Tin.
From Laos, Sabaidi.
So you were learning the language. That's amazing. It must have been so fascinating to learn that language. I know it's so different from every other language that we know.
It's so different from English. Yes, exactly. And and you know what the wonderful thing was is that the longer I stayed and the more Lao I learned, and I didn't learn a lot, I was beginning to understand why students were making the mistakes that they were making in English.
Uh-huh.
You know, those it's every, well, you know this as an EFL teacher too, that every language group makes particular errors based on the
Yes,
based on the language that they speak as their first language. You know, Italians make
that's right.
typical errors that are Italian, and Lao people do the same. So,
Oh,
but it's only in sort of learning more and more about the language that you're able to understand why the students keep saying that, and you know,
right.
it.
You know
So,
how, how to help them because you're actually
well,
learning. You can
what
hear
it
the
is, I was
sound.
learning more about how to help them, and then all of a sudden, you know, so there was sort of lots of learning going on. You know, they were learning, I was learning, and anyway.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So, so you're now in Canada, and so that isolation period started in about March when you arrived back. And tell me a little bit about what have you been doing during this time? How have you kept busy? And also, I'm curious to know, have you done any online teaching at all?
All right. Well, how have I kept busy? I haven't been dragon boating. I haven't been able to go to the gym. I haven't been able to go to the swimming pool. So I bought a
Mm,
bicycle, and I'm riding my bike fairly regularly. As long as it doesn't rain, I'm out riding and sort of gaining confidence, which is important. In fact, I'm not even sure I'll have to go back to the gym after this. So anyway, but it's certainly it's I work on my cardio and I work on my general fitness, you know, on my
yes,
bicycle. And Victoria is such a beautiful city to ride around, that and it's got hills too, so you know you can get a good,
lovely.
you get more of a workout that way. And I've got a garden, a vegetable garden, in an allotment just up the road from here. So I'm learning about growing vegetables. I'm learning more about growing vegetables because I'm taking the garden seriously now. Before, I would kind of garden in the summer and grow a few things and then leave it, go away for the winter, or for part of the winter
Okay.
anyway, and not think about it very much. But now, well, I'm sort of seeing a 12 months of the year vegetable garden, because one of the advantages of Victoria is that you can actually grow food all year round. So there's specific winter
Nice.
vegetables, but it doesn't snow here, so not a lot. And so you can it's a bit like the north of Italy. So you know, you can grow
Lovely.
fennel and cabbages and stuff like that. And what else? I'm not watching a lot of Netflix. That's the interesting thing, is people talk about sort of, you know, binging on Netflix, but I haven't done that.
Right. Yeah.
Let me think. Oh, you asked about online teaching.
Yes.
Yes, as of this coming week, I am continuing the course that I had to abandon in Vientiane. The
Wow.
Institute of Foreign Affairs, where I was teaching, has decided to work with some of its former volunteer teachers, and so I am teaching writing to my former students, and
Oh,
I've spent the last 10 days or so sort of, you know, um, working on presentation for, you know, of materials, because it's one thing
mm,
to sort, well, you know, from teaching on Zoom, that
yes.
it's a very different platform than being in the classroom. And I'm using actually Facebook groups
Okay.
to keep everybody sorted out, and once a week or so going live on each group, you know, is sort of going over
Okay.
sort of problems related to writing, that kind of thing. Yeah,
Hmm.
I'm looking forward to it. So it's not the same as being back in the classroom, but
Yeah.
well, it's the next best thing. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's very exciting. Well, all the best with your online teaching adventure, because it's an
Thank
adventure.
you.
Let's face it. That's fantastic, and I think that your students will be very happy to have you back in this format. You know, it
Yeah,
might
the
be the
only
same.
problem is the time difference, of course, because there's a 14-hour
Uh,
time difference right now. So when it's Monday morning there, it's Sunday what's sort of late afternoon here in
Right. Okay.
Victoria, which means that, you know, I've seen the first week's schedule, and I think my classes generally start around 8 o'clock in the evening, so
Oh, okay.
so I
Different
have to sort
time.
of find ways of staying awake, you know, and looking lively at 8 o'clock in the evening but I can do it, I think, yeah.
That's great. Absolutely. No, you'll be amazing. And presentations and writing, that sounds really useful skills for students to learn online as well. Okay. And so going back to talking about this isolation, do you think that this time has changed our mindsets in a way and has helped us and other people to refocus, to kind of slow down and focus on what's important? Have you found yourself going through that kind of process at all?
Yeah, in fact, especially in the kitchen, because I'm somebody who's sort of always rushing and thinking of the next thing I have to do, and I'm sure that's no different than anybody else. And one of the things I find is that when I'm cooking, I'm actually taking the time to prepare food slowly. You know, when the recipe says dice the onion gets diced. It's not just kind of, okay, good enough. You know, it's
Rushing through.
everything. It's methodical, and because there is no rush. So it's actually a very mindful way, I think, of approaching cooking, of approaching other
Yes.
tasks. Same this morning, I was running because of the rain. I needed to get some exercise, so I thought, well, I'll vacuum the house,
Oh,
run the Hoover top to bottom, and that means sort of lugging it up and down the stairs and everything. But I just found myself thinking about it in such a way that it wasn't work, it was a way of moving, and I cleaned the house, and I don't know, I didn't feel tired after doing that. I just felt as if I achieved something else. But that's kind of dull when you think, you know, there's way more interesting things I've done in my life than vacuum the house. But it's just an example of how
yeah.
life seems to have slowed down. And, you know, here's something I learned. I read it recently. There's
Yeah.
an American reporter. He used to be a war reporter. He's now sort of an explorer, adventurer. His name's Paul Salopek. And he's walking along the migration route that the early humans took through Africa and Asia. It's a 21,000-mile trek. And he was asked recently, actually, he's holed up in Myanmar because he's also affected by by COVID-19, and he has to self-isolate somewhere. So he's in Myanmar at the present time. But he was recently asked if he had any key lessons that humans should take from the current situation. And his remark really hit home with me. He said, "Stop over-planning your life." Think about that. That's all we do is plan, you know? And even when we teach English, not necessarily other languages, the forms of the verb that we use to talk about the future, there's 3 or 4 of them. You know, is this a plan? Is this a hope? Is this an aspiration? You know, is this definite? You know, is this something that happens all the time with, you know, our mindset is all about planning. And it's no wonder, actually, that it's so difficult sometimes to teach certain groups of students exactly what the concept of the future is. Maybe because their culture is not so obsessed with what they're going to do next. And
that's a very interesting point. Wow. Don't overplan. Absolutely.
So, I mean, we want to make goals. We want to set goals for ourselves. We want to make plans because that's the way it's always been. But, you know, maybe this is an opportunity to really discover how it feels not to be able to do those things, so that when the world returns to normal, whatever that normal is, maybe we'll go, well, I lived without that. I don't really need to do that, you know. And
Yeah.
in that, I'm referring to things like sort of maybe sort of just international travel, go wherever you can, you know, pollute the
Yes.
planet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. We kind of took all of that for granted, planning and traveling, and it was just very normal for us. And just hop on a plane, you know, go somewhere, as well as making long-term plans. But it's forced us to kind of slow down and accept that we can't really plan too far ahead in the future at the moment. We have to take every day as it comes and reshuffle our schedule, our plans. A lot of people have had to adjust their lifestyle, and you know, a lot of people have lost their jobs and have to rethink about how to live their lives at the moment. So it's been a very big shock, I think, for the world, used to this busy, frenetic lifestyle. I think everyone can relate to that. I think that we were just so used to that, and now we've had to have this pause, this break from that, and refocus.
Yeah. And you know, I think it isn't an easy situation. We're sort of, we've adjusted, but we kind of cycle through the emotions connected with it, you know. Some days we think, oh, this is all right, especially if the sun is shining. But when the weather turns cooler and it starts to rain, and you realize just how limited you are in terms of what you can do. It can be a struggle. It can be a struggle.
Yeah. I would say a lot of ups and downs and waves of feelings, and positive and negative as well. It's not easy at all. And some days you really, you don't want to get out of bed, and other days you feel like you could, you know, conquer the world. I think for me, at least, it's been a very emotional time these last few months in isolation. Yep.
Well, particularly so when you've got family members who are sort of live on the other side of the world, as you do. You know, you have your parents in Italy, and my older son is in England, and many of my friends are spread out around the world, or spread out across Canada. I was used to sort of enjoying that freedom to be able to go and see people, and now that I don't work anymore, and sometimes I wonder, you know, well, is this it? You know, and yet, you know, our grandparents only had that. So we've been very fortunate.
That's true. That's true. Yes, thanks to, I would say, internet and all this communication that we can have, we can keep in touch with people, even though we can't actually jump on a plane and visit them yet. But I think we've been lucky to be able to have this use of all this types of connections, you could say. Talking about connection. So as you said, you have your son is in England and your other son is in Canada, and you have friends and family all over the world. How have your relationships changed with them? Maybe not so much the relationship, but the way you connect. How have you been keeping in touch with your friends and family around the world?
Well, let me think. We use Messenger, we use WhatsApp, you know, but with the son who's here in Victoria, I mean, it's much more different. You know, I can use my phone or text or whatever. But when he comes over, and it's just in the last couple of weeks that he can come over and come in the house, provided we practice social distancing, and we open the windows at one end of the house and at the other end of the house so that there's a through draft, and I freeze usually because I always feel the cold, it seems, ever since I returned from Laos. And you know, at least we're able to have a meal together. But so that's with him. Other friends will meet me when the weather's nice. You know, they'll come over and sit on the patio. They'll come in through the back gate and sit at the table, and I sit on the other side of the patio, and so we have a nice visit that way. But it's not the same. It's not the same. Friends who are sort of far away, well, you know, email, Messenger, Skype, Zoom occasionally, just depending on what's
Yeah.
who I'm talking to. And but in a way, Sonia, it was always like that. The communication was always done through the same channels.
Right.
It was
Mm,
starting to be that way.
mm.
So there's
It sort of
nothing really
changed the way.
new about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're able to see your son and your friends, even though we have to keep practicing social distancing. I'm glad that that's uh, relaxed a little bit more. I mean, I think I remember when you first came back, it was very hard to see your friends, and you had to keep more of a distance. I mean, I think so.
Well,
I
and the
think
weather
that's
wasn't good at all. It was really cold. So, I mean, people had to stay
mm,
inside and, you couldn't invite people inside. I mean, you couldn't. That was it, you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, um, very interesting. Pippa, what kind of message would you give friends during this time, friends and listeners, uh, based on your experience with life in isolation? I think you've been keeping quite busy and active as much as you could.
Um, I would say to focus on doing the things you can do.
Yes,
Goals are important. I remember one of the other people you spoke to in this Conversations in Isolation series, Gary, he talked a
yes,
lot. He talked about setting goals. And I would agree that goals are important. But if you can't see very far ahead and you don't know how things are going to be, it's very difficult to set goals. And
that's
for me in particular, I refer to my own case, it's harder to set goals because I'm older. And one
right.
of the reasons why I decided to stop working and travel and get involved with international volunteering is because I realized a few years ago that I could not take my health for granted. I had two total hip replacements because from one day to the next, literally my hip joints just fell to pieces, and I
Oh,
had to wait for surgery and have that surgery.
oh
And
yes.
when I was recovering from the second surgery, that was when I realized that life really is too short. You don't know what's sort of going to be there, and that I had to sort of grab the moment. So I grabbed the
Mm,
moment, and then the moment was taken from me.
yeah.
So that's why I say it's harder, I think, when you're older because you don't really
Mm,
know sometimes from one year to the next what's going to befall you, whether you'll be able to do
right.
some of these things again. Um, so I guess I would say in terms of doing the things you can is tackle the chores that you've been putting off, learn to sort of
Mm,
look at these chores and these tasks sort of through a new kind of lens, I guess you would call it,
oh, okay.
whereas I'd say
Yeah.
speak about when I talk about sort of doing things mindfully, you see people sort of putting up TikTok videos and
Oh,
things
yes.
online, a
Yeah.
sort of, playing with a vacuum cleaner or sort of doing something else with I don't know, with a feather duster. And it's fun, those little kind of creative outlets are important, if that's your mindful way of approaching a task. It's also an opportunity to learn something new. Um, it could be a language, it could be a subject that you always meant to investigate, learn to play a musical instrument. Um, Essentially use this opportunity, use this break. Yeah,
Yes.
which is an opportunity. Use it to grow in some way, okay? And
Mm,
but most importantly, be good to yourself, and
that's very
don't
wise.
force yourself to do things just because you have to prove that you did
Mm,
it.
right.
There's too much of
Right.
that out in the real world when people were, I mean, how is everything going to change? I barely look at Instagram anymore because I'm not going to see
Mm,
these Instagram sort of look at me, perched on a motorcycle sort of at the edge of this cliff. See what I did, We were
yeah.
getting tired of that.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
think
I see what you mean.
I see what you mean.
Other
Yeah,
things are more impressive and more important. You know, if somebody says, "Look,
absolutely.
I learned a language," or I learned how to you know, play this scale on a violin. You know, that impresses me more than
That's,
somebody who's sort of, you know, all duck
yeah,
faced into the camera. You know, on Instagram. You know what I mean?
I do. I do. No, I think you're very wise, and self-care and focus on what you can do. If you can learn something, that's great, but don't be too hard on yourself as well, because I think in this climate, there's been a lot of focus on achieving and doing this and doing that, but just
Yeah.
take it easy. Don't overdo it, because it's an unprecedented time. It's a time that we've never experienced, and our parents, all our generations have never really experienced this. So it's completely new, and it's complete reshuffle of everything that we experienced before in our lives. So we have to really just be kind to ourselves. I think that's very important.
That's true. Although, you know, one of my sons pointed out to me that this isn't completely unprecedented. He said, because in terms of sort of previous generations, because he said Granny, referring to my mother, he said,
Yep.
she didn't know at the start of World War II when it was going to end. It was a war, and
True.
it went on and on and on. And actually, in my mother's case, her parents, my grandparents, were in Malaya, in Singapore,
Oh,
in an internment camp, in a Japanese internment camp during the Second World War. So they were locked
goodness.
up for 3.5 years, and she had very little information about, you know, their whereabouts. And I suppose
That's
in many
good.
ways, I mean, it's sort of like when you don't know, life goes on.
Yep.
I wish in a way that I could ask her how she felt at that time. I never bothered
Right.
asking. It was more about sort of how her parents had survived, as opposed to
Yep.
how she felt. But it must have been a very,
Yep.
very uncertain time, you know. One, you
Yes.
had the war, and two, in her case, you know, her parents were gone, and she didn't know she would ever see them again.
Right. Yep. No, you're right. That's absolutely true. That must have been so scary. My goodness.
Well, also probably for your mum, because isn't your mother? I mean, her background is Dutch, and I mean, would
Yes.
same
Yep.
thing.
My grandparents also, they went through the war as well, and they had. My grandfather was a sea captain. My Dutch grandfather was a sea captain, and he used to tell us many stories of being at sea, you know, and being attacked, and it's a whole other story. But he always survived, and he had some very interesting tips on how to survive those times. So impressive, you know, how they managed to get through that. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
and this in a sense, this is very different in a sense. At least, you know, for now we have food to eat. Some things are
that's
in
right.
short supply, but the basics, I mean, life is pretty normal here for me. You know, I know that I can
Yep.
go to the supermarket and buy the food that I want to buy, and you know, there's even flour in the shops again. So,
Oh,
and
that's
toilet
good.
paper.
Yeah, I mean, we have the safety of our homes, and we have the luxury of being able to be in communication with our friends and family thanks to the internet, as you were saying,
Yeah.
compared to in the war when this was not around. So I do think we should also, well, not should, but we can feel very grateful that we have all these means of communication. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Pippa, I'd like to ask you another question. What's one thing that you would keep from this isolation life once life goes back to normal, or what we think it will go back to? And what is one thing that you would throw out, a habit or something that you've learned during this time?
What I would keep, my sense of humor.
Fantastic.
That personally,
Yeah.
and this sort of feeling that as long as you keep your sense of humor, you and look on the light side, you can get through most adverse situations. That really
It's
kind
very
of rang through. Last week we had our book club meeting. We're meeting online. We do it through Skype. And one of the protagonists in the book that we read, the book was actually an excellent novel called The Gentleman in Moscow. And one of the questions we were asked about the book is sort of what to us was the book about? And
okay.
did we feel that the book is about surviving adversity? And well, I'm not going to give away the plot of the book, but suffice to say, it's about a man who ends up being isolated in a Moscow hotel during the early
Oh,
years of the Soviet Union. And and I think one of the um, his ability to survive that kind of isolation was very much due to his ability to laugh at himself and his and ultimately his sense of humor. And I would say that that is, it's not a true story, it's a novel, but
okay.
uh I think there's often lessons in novels, that we can take away and
Yeah.
sort of say, well, how does that apply to me? Um, so I would say yes, I'd hang on to my sense of humor. What would I get rid of? Well, I think I will probably have a smaller carbon footprint when all
Mm.
this is over. I've realized that I'm only driving my car now once a week because I have a
Right.
bicycle I can ride,
That's great.
and there's
Yeah.
buses that run by my house. So I think
Mm.
I'll probably definitely get rid of my car. And
Wow.
I know that I won't be able to travel as much. I feel very certain that I won't be able to travel as much. And that
Okay.
has got nothing to do with sort of the fact that we will have uh, it'll be harder to travel. It will be the fact that it will cost more money, and
Yes.
we may be even restricted in terms of how many trips a year we're actually allowed to take. Well, if it's going to be so
Oh,
expensive, we probably will be restricted. That we won't be able to just
yeah.
jump on a plane at every opportunity and rush off to Paris for the weekend, or wherever you go in Sydney for the weekend, fly up to
Yeah.
Cairns. It's
Yeah.
not going to happen, and it's
That's
not going to
right. That's
happen
right.
here. You know.
That's going to be hard to get used to. I think, especially having family overseas. We were used to seeing our family every once or twice a year, even. But we'll see how we go, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up soon.
Well, maybe
Uh,
what will happen is you'll go for longer. Maybe ships will come
oh.
back, not cruise ships, but ships as a
Mm.
way of getting from point A to point B. Maybe we've sort of run our trains into the ground in Canada and eliminated so
Right.
many rail routes, but maybe trains will make a comeback here. They're
That's
pretty
right.
popular in Australia.
Uh,
Um, Maybe long distance coaches, buses will come back so that
yeah.
there will be other ways of traveling, not just getting on a plane. And
That's right.
maybe
I think we'll have.
if we go somewhere, we'll just stay longer.
I think so. I think that's definitely a point that we'll to consider for the future. Yeah. Wow, this has been really interesting for me to have a chat with you, Pippa, in Canada,
Well,
and I'm in
likewise.
Australia. It's really, really fun. um, great. So tell me, Pippa, do you envision life, as we were talking about changes that we think will happen to transport, for example, and how we commute? Do you think that our lifestyle will go back to what it was before, or do you think that it will be very difficult to go back to that busy lifestyle, that we will be still continuing in this kind of slower pace once isolation is over? Hello? Ooh, Pippa? Oh, I think I think I lost Pippa. I'll just try and invite her again. Okay, sorry. Okay. I think we just had a technical problem.
Hi.
Hello.
We sort of blocked out for a moment. I don't know what happened.
Yeah. I think you dropped out. I'm not quite sure, but anyway, that's okay.
Okay. No, it showed that I still
Yeah.
had an internet connection, but anyway, sorry about
Okay.
that.
So sorry, I was just towards the end of our conversation, Pippa. I was just asking you, do you think that life will go back to normal at the end of this time, or do you think that it would be very difficult for our life to go back to that normal busy time?
I hope it doesn't. I just hope that sort of people have taken the time to smell the roses, literally, at this because they're in bloom now here. But they have taken the time to sort of really think about perhaps what their priorities are, what the things that would make their lives better, if their lives, be honest with themselves. Is my life actually better as a result of what I've experienced? I'm taking part in a sort of a first conversation next week with a local group, which is one sort of some input in term and with regard to sort of life post COVID-19 in Victoria, and what are your suggestions? What would you like to see? So this is just kind of a sort of grassroots project, but hopefully the information gleaned from these encounters will be taken forward, and presented to provincial representatives, members of parliament, and serve as sort of.
Wonderful. But
I don't have high hopes, but because right now with everything that's happening in the United States, I'm dismayed actually. I just thought we had made more progress than that, and it kind of affects us because we have a border with the United States, and we kind of tend to rely on what goes on there for our well-being, in terms of the economy, that kind of thing. And it's dismaying to see that we haven't really come that far at all.
No, that's right. You're very closely connected to the United States. Everything that's happening there, at the moment, it's terrible. Okay. This has been wonderful, Pippa. Pippa, you can follow Pippa if you like she has a blog. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your blog, Pippa?
Well, my blog is The Lady Goes to Laos. The best way to access that is via my dedicated Facebook page called The Lady Goes to Laos. And all right, I'm not in Laos anymore, but my heart is there, and for the next 10 weeks or so I will be there with this online teaching. I guess there will come a point where hopefully I'll do some more, have the opportunity to do some more international volunteering, in which case I shall rename my Facebook page and my blog. I think this sounds really good. The Lady Goes to Laos and a lot of other places. There's that L alliteration in there. So
and a lot of other places. That sounds wonderful. Well, this has been wonderful, and I'd like to remind everyone that thank you for all the friends that have joined on Instagram Live. This will also be available on Spotify as a podcast and YouTube as well. This is another episode with Pippa Turney from Canada, and I want to thank you very much for your time and your energy helping me with this project of mine.
It's been a pleasure. It's been great. It's been great to see you again. last
Yes.
saw you, I think, in 2018 in Sydney.
Sydney,
And
yeah.
I think we've actually had a longer conversation than we did the last time because you were in between classes when I saw
I
you.
think yes, that's right. I was still living that very busy lifestyle a couple of years ago, but now everything's kind of slowed down a little bit. So I'd like to tell everyone to stay safe and take care of yourself during this time. Don't be hard on yourself, as we were saying before. Be kind. Be kind. That's very important.
And you
during
stay
this
safe
time.
too.
Stay
You stay
safe.
safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody stay safe. Take care.
So lovely. So thank you so much, Pippa. I'm going to
Thank
go,
you
but
for
have a lovely.
inviting me.
It's been a
Thank you for
pleasure. Have a
inviting me.
lovely Saturday evening in Canada, and it's Sunday here in Sydney. So
Will do. Thanks a lot, Sonia. You
okay.
take care.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye bye.